This time of year, classroom management and behavior problems can start to surface or become even worse than they already are. So today, let's chat about getting a reset or restart on your classroom management. Sometimes we have to retrain and restart to gain a firmer foothold with managing our classrooms and dealing with student behavior. It's easy to forget that our students are just that, students, kids. And they are still learning to do so many things, including how to behave all day long. So that's why we need to retrain periodically. We also need to remember we are human and prone to making mistakes. And maybe we are not being as consistent as we were in the beginning of the year. Because let's face it, consistency is the root of most, not all, classroom management problems. So let's take a break from reading strategies and talk classroom management today. I'm Lisa Burns, a teacher success coach, veteran elementary teacher, and mom of 5. And this is the Teach Joyfully podcast. Thanks for joining me today. Are you missing out? Team H.O.P.E Insiders get extra encouragement, tips and tricks, surprise freebies, and more. Become a H.O.P.E Insider today and get access to all kinds of freebies at www.hopeineducation.com/vault. It's getting close to spring, and that means everyone is getting antsy, including us, the teachers. I know you're nodding along because it's true. First off, you're not going to retrain your students all at once. You're going to give yourself a day and then a week to retrain your students in classroom behavior expectations. What do I mean by that? You're going to take a day and do some reviewing, and then you're going to stretch the rest of it out over a week and just hit it periodically throughout the rest of the week so that you and your students are reminded about what is important in your classroom and how it runs most effectively. So where do you begin with a reset in your classroom management? Go back and review your power phrase. Is it really solid? Is it something you say with ease and without having to think about it? Or do you need to go back and practice some more? If you don't know what a power phrase is, go back to episode 15 on how to have the right words at the right time for better classroom management. Once you have that power phrase solid and you really know what you're doing, or maybe you want to make some tweaks to it and you're going to change it up a little bit, once that's solid, you're ready to dive in with your class into rules and consequences, of course. Begin by reviewing each rule and all of the consequences. What kinds of consequences do you have in your classroom? I can't tell you how often I get into a classroom and realize that consequences are either a hit or miss affair, determined by the teacher. Maybe you miss a little recess, maybe you don't. It's very loose, or there's too many consequences. And then there's the last one, which is you get in there and the only real consequence other than reporting where you were on that clip chart or whatever the system is to your parents at the end of each day is simply that phone call home if you get to the end of the line and you're really having a hard time. Those just aren't consistent enough to be effective consequences. We need to make sure that we have a strong sense of what's going to happen after each and every time a student breaks a rule. There needs to be a line and there needs to be something that happens. Whatever that something is, it can be go to timeout, fill out a reflection sheet. It can be something else, but it needs to be consistent. Whatever you're deciding to do, we know consistency is key. Then you're going to model and practice those rules and consequences. Why do I say practice the consequences? Well, first, we know we have to model and practice the rules, but practicing the consequences is equally important. Do you do that? Imagine that timeout is your consequence. Your students need to know what timeout is, why you're doing it, what's the purpose behind timeout, where it is, where do they go, how to get there, what are your expectations if you've told a student that they need to go to timeout. Is your expectation that they stomp their way there and disrupt every single child along the way? Is your expectation that they angrily throw their work on the floor and run over to timeout? Or is your expectation that your students will get up, take themselves over to timeout quietly, without disturbing anyone else, sit down, and behave themselves? They're going to take out a sheet. of whatever paper you have there, if you have a form that they fill in, whatever that is, and write down and explain what it is that they did and why they're here and what their plan is to fix it and to make the rest of the day go better. The point of timeout is to reset. It's not a punishment. The point of timeout is it's a reset. It's a chance to stop, reflect, and restart and start fresh. So students need to know what to do while they're there and when to get out of timeout. Are you, the teacher, going to tell them when it's time to get up out of timeout? Or when they finish their reflection, are they allowed to get themselves up and bring it to you so that you can review it quickly and they can get back into their day? How are you going to handle that? All of these are pieces that you need to know ahead of time so you can train your students on your expectations for timeout. Because if you don't train them in your expectations in timeout, you're going to get the student who stomps across the room, knocking other students' work off their desk, yelling at you as they go to timeout. It's going to happen. It may not happen every time, but it will happen. So train them in your expectations, practice it and model it as a class, and then everyone is clear on what needs to happen and how it needs to happen. And you need to have a consequence for not going to timeout correctly. So make sure that you think of that as well. Now, I'm big on having a place to just go and calm down in the room, separate from timeout. In order for students to learn to self-regulate and take care of themselves before problems happen, they need somewhere they can go when they are struggling, whether they're frustrated with an assignment and they just need to walk away for a minute. Perhaps they're frustrated with their person who's sitting next to them, or they're frustrated with an assignment, or they're just had a really bad morning at home and they need a second to get themselves back into school mode. Whatever the reason, they just need a second. And you need a place for them to be able to do that if you want your students to really take on their own self-care and managing their own behavior. This is a way to do it. Whether you call it a calm down spot, I call it a coffee break spot. It can be the coffee shop, but I tell students that when you work in an office, you can take a coffee break. Well, why not give your students a coffee break? First, you need a spot. Now, you may have a really small classroom and there simply isn't any extra room in that classroom. Your break spot, your calm down spot, whatever you're calling it, can be as simple as a stack of pillows in a corner. It really can. It doesn't have to be anything fancy and it doesn't have to take up a lot of room. So don't go thinking that you don't have room in your classroom. You can take one small corner and put some pillows out there, and that can be that calm down spot. If you have a little extra money or a little extra room, you can put a small basket of maybe fidget toys there. Your students can be allowed to take a water bottle with them and a journal with them so they can sit there and write and journal. You could have headphones and music that plays that students can listen to while they're there. I do highly recommend that you have a timer. If you don't have a lot of room, so there's no room for a little table or anything for any of these extra supplies, you can actually Velcro the timer to the wall. Then your students can set the timer and get started on their calming down. This puts a limit on it so students aren't lounging there all day. There's a time, you have a couple of minutes, you can have 5 minutes, 10 minutes, however long that you are deciding is okay, and then students can come to you if they still feel like they need more time. But this does put a limit on students being there all day long. And if you're doing that in a corner, you can put up a little poster that has all kinds of suggestions for calming down, whether it's breathing exercises, ways to kind of shake off thoughts that are bothering you. All kinds of things can be on that poster so that students have a reference for ways to help themselves when maybe they're too upset to be able to think of it themselves. And if you want to delineate that space with maybe a little bit of LED lighting, even better. If you can't, no big deal. It doesn't have to be fancy. Your students will use it no matter how fancy or how simple it is. Trust me. All right. So the next thing you need to train is voice levels. Now, I always start with silence. So why do I start with silence? Well, because so often students don't actually know what silence is. They don't. You might think they know, but how often do you have a chatty class and they can't seem to get it? They're just chatty all year long. Chances are those students don't actually know what silence is. In our tech-addicted, busy, loud world, silence is kind of a foreign language. And so we have to actually teach that language to our students. So we need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and that means sitting in silence. So we have to practice that. Your students probably don't know, at least some of them, what silence is, and they may be very uncomfortable with being silent, and they need to get comfortable. They need to build their stamina with being able to be silent. I like to think of it this way. When we were training our dog to be able to stay, to sit and stay or lay down and stay, we call it park it. So she goes somewhere and lays down and just stays there until we ask her to get up again. But we had to build up her stamina in order to be able to do that. She could not do that for very long, less than a minute at first, because she just was so excitable and so happy and wanted to be with us that going and staying by herself was torture. And so we had to work up to a longer and longer time. That's the same thing with silence for many students. They cannot be silent for as long as you think they can. And some of them don't know how to be silent at all. And so if you have a chatty class, chances are they either don't know what silence is or they're extremely uncomfortable with silence. So you need to practice. Once you get good with silence, then you can start allowing different levels of talking. You need to practice each level a lot. Now, obviously, you need to get brain breaks and lots of time for free talk in between. And don't just do silence. Don't just do quiet voice levels. Students need to talk too, and they need to talk in a relaxed and comfortable manner in between all of this training. Now, make sure you practice all levels of talking and practice it with background noise. That means maybe you're teaching in a small group and students are working silently. That's the next level of training in silence, because once you're talking, it's really easy for students to start talking as well. They need to get comfortable with the quiet sounds of you working and talking with students while they're still silent. If you're going to add background music into your classroom, that's another level of training, because it's easy for students, once there's a little bit of background noise, to start changing their voice level as well. So they need to practice with all of the different pieces that will be added in. All right, now you need to get specific on your expectations. And what I mean is specific things like being in the hallway, lining up, attention getters, where to work and how to work, on the floor, in their seat. Do you have flexible seating? You need to train that as well. All of these little bits and parts that make up your full day in your classroom, all of those expectations need to be retrained as well. They may not take long because your students might have them down, but if they don't, or if it's slipping a little, you really need to make sure that you get in there and help them retrain so that they do have it down and you can move forward without having to worry about reminding them all the time. I know for me, being a broken record about what to do and how to do it will really ruin my day. And then it's time for other systems and procedures. This includes things like movement around the classroom, how to get from A to B, when to get from A to B. Are they allowed to get up during a quiet work time to go and get supplies on their own and come back to their seat? Or do they have to raise their hand or in some way signal you for permission? All of these pieces are important. What are you comfortable with? Decide what you're comfortable with and what works for you, and then your students will adapt. Remember, if you're happy, they'll be happy. But if you're not and you're frustrated with the particular system, your students are going to be unhappy as well. For me, I like students to be able to get up and get what they need when they need it, as long as it's not a direct teaching time. If it is a work time for them, then I like them to be able to get what they need and get back to work and not have to wait on me. But if you're not comfortable with that, or if your class can't handle that, then you need to find another system. But make sure that you train them in those kinds of movements. So another one would be interruptions. When are they allowed to interrupt? For going to the bathroom? If students have to go down the hallway to go to the restroom, do you have a checkout for that? And how are you going to remember that they're down there in the bathroom? Is there something your students said in their workspace so that you know that they have gone to the restroom? I know I can easily forget where everyone has gone in a heartbeat because honestly, I have two brain cells and one of them is busy. Life is just too busy, and so it's easy to forget those pieces, even momentarily. So having some sort of a signal for you is also good. All right, how do they signal you when they don't understand? When do they signal you for when they don't understand? You don't want children asking questions in the middle of your teaching unless you're asking for questions, or you'll never get through the lesson. So I usually ask students to save their questions to the end unless I stop in the middle for questions, which I often do. But I have stopping places for that so they can ask their questions and then we can move on. This prevents students from constantly raising their hands and asking questions, and it takes forever to get through the lesson. And quite honestly, it interrupts the lesson so much that many students don't even remember what you were teaching. What about when you're teaching in a small group? When can they interrupt you? How do they let you know that they need help? Do you have a system for that? There's lots of great systems out there for how students can let you know that they're waiting in line without waiting in line. Whether it's a clip system, write their name on a chart, whatever that is, some way that they can signal that they're waiting in line and that when you're in between groups that you need to go around and figure out who was first and who was second, and you can help them and then they can get back to work. They also need a system for what to do while they're waiting for help. What do they do while they wait for you? Students who are simply sitting around waiting always get into trouble. It doesn't mean that they're naughty. It just means that they have nothing better to do, so they start bothering someone else. You need to have something for them to do if they're stuck and they can't move forward. So decide what it is that students are going to work on if they're stuck and they can't move forward and they're still waiting for you. You need to have a system for supplies. When can they get supplies? How can they get supplies? Which supplies are they allowed to access themselves? And which supplies do they need permission for? All of that needs to be retrained. I know that this seems so nitty-gritty, but let me tell you, if you train all of these pieces, your classroom will run like clockwork. As long as you're consistent, obviously. And don't forget to retrain your students for playground expectations. Playground expectations are so important because playground problems spill back into the classroom so easily. And that can ruin the next section of your day for sure. If you're looking for ideas on how to solve playground problems, you can check out episode number 43, How to Solve Playground Disputes Quickly and Easily. I'll link that in the show notes for you. And next, this one is a big one for me, is tattling. You have to talk to your students about tattling all over again because tattling just creeps back in. Students have a great need for justice, and I understand that. And honestly, it's not a bad thing. However, it's not always their business, and it can ruin their day and yours if they're tattling. So there's a few ways that I talk to students. One of them is I have 4 B's and a DE. Blood, broken bones, breathing, barfing, or is it dangerous or an emergency? Those are the questions I ask students, and if they answer no to all of those, I ask them, does this directly involve you or is it about someone else? Yes. If it directly involves them, then I'm more likely to listen. But if it doesn't, not so much. And the last one is such a powerful statement. What were you hoping to accomplish by telling me this? Quite often, students are just hoping to get someone else in trouble. That may not be a conscious thought, but that's really what's behind a lot of tattling. This question often stops students in their tracks and stops the tattling. Give it a try. And one last piece, and this one's just an idea for you. How often do you give an assignment and then students have all these questions? I don't remember what to do. What page is it? What should I do next? Or you have the student who simply cannot seem to get started. And part of it's because they don't even know where to begin because they're overwhelmed. So a great way to avoid all of these problems is one, do a quick review of what your expectation is for the assignment after you've given the assignment. And then break down your assignment into check boxes. Yep, check boxes. It's easy to put a series of checkboxes onto the board and then just break the assignment down into a couple of chunks. Better yet, have your students help you break the assignment down into appropriate chunks as you work together to make those checkboxes. This makes life so much easier for students and really does help them to know where to start and what to do next. So many students have ADHD, sensory disorders, or just struggle with executive function issues. This helps those students who struggle with so many of these things to be able to get started and keep going. If you just have one specific student, you can do it onto a Post-it note just for that student and stick it on their desk. That will help them just as well. All right, I promised a few tips to help make life a little more pleasant for everyone, so here they are. Have a sign-up system when your students need to wait in line for help. You don't want them physically waiting in line, so either have some sort of a clip system or have a chart where students can put a Post-it note or sign their name up so they know their place in line, and so do you. Then when you have a minute, you can go down the list and go help anyone who needs help. This gets students back to their seats and working, whether they're working on a separate project or continue working on anything that they can while they're waiting for you, and they're not standing around causing trouble. Now, I'm sure you already have a system for those fast finishers in your class, and fact practice and review pages and all of those things are great, but I like students to go just a little bit deeper. So either create a few projects as extensions for students to go deeper on topics you've already explored in class, or help your students find passion projects, things they're really passionate about that they want to learn more about. Then they can have a project folder they can turn to whenever they have extra time or they're waiting and they can't go further on their work while they're waiting for you to help them. Turn in talk buddies. I love having turn in talk buddies because when you're asking students to turn in talk, how many times do you have students who are fighting over a friend because they all want to be that person's buddy? Simply tap every other student on the head and ask them to turn to their left or turn to their right and then find their buddy on that side. Or you can ask students to be a buddy with the person who's sitting behind them. Either way, it solves your problem. All right, here's your marching orders. Retraining is normal and essential. If your students aren't doing well, it's okay. It turns out they're just human. Retrain everything 2 to 3 times a year as needed. From timeout to voice levels to when to go to the bathroom and how to get supplies. You name it, you need to retrain it. And sometimes we need a new system or tweaks for specific problems. And you can help your students be more successful when you understand that frustration and misunderstandings often cause misbehaviors. So they need to know how to get help, when to get help, and you need to have systems for all of those things. In addition, make sure you're breaking down assignments that have more than one step so that students know where to start and what to do next. If you have a way to do that, your students will stay on task much better throughout the entire day. And one last piece, I'd like to have a folder for students that's work in progress, everything that they're still working on, because how often do you finish maybe your reading time or your writing time or math, and you have students who haven't finished that assignment? You want all those assignments to get finished. If each student has a work in progress folder, then they can go back to that anytime they have a free moment or they're waiting for you or they finish something else quickly. Then they can go back and work on the things that need finishing. So that's it for this episode of the Teach Joyfully podcast, my teacher friends. My sincere thanks to you, my listeners, for tuning in, and for all those of you who have taken the time to post a review, email me your thoughts, or DM me on Instagram with your feedback and topic requests. You can find the show notes and all the resources mentioned in the episode on my website at www.hopeineducation.com/podcast. And remember, a happy teacher is a good teacher. Until next time, teach joyfully and take care of you.